Hey, Yvette, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Hello, Ariel. Can you hear me?
Hi, yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Owens. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, sir. Your picture's coming through kind of dark. That's better. Thank you.
You got it.
Hello, John and Anchu. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, fantastic.
Anchu, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, Anshu. Can you say hello?
Hi. I can hear you.
Okay.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Are you plugged in, Ariel?
Yeah, I have the presentation ready.
Okay.
Hello, Crystal. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Duarte. Can you hear me? Hello, Miguel. Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, Aldo. Hello, Alfonso. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Scott.
Thank you, Aldo. Commissioner Duarte, can you hear me? Okay, before we begin the meeting, I want to remind everybody to keep your uh, mics muted unless you're speaking. It will pick up any sound in the room.
Okay, I will now call to order our meeting. Good evening and welcome to the March 17, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Please note this meeting is being attended by the Planning Commission and applicants via teleconference. We thank you for your patience as we navigate city business through this new meeting process. For the benefit of the public and as required by the Brown Act, all voting will be by roll call. I will now call the meeting to order. Planning Secretary Camel, can I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Spathopoulos is absent. Commissioner Ortiz,
Here.
Commissioner Montoya,
Present.
Vice Chair Owens,
Present.
and Chair Duarte.
Present. Okay. Now's the time for any announcements from any commissioners on future agenda items and conference meeting reports. Vice Chair Owens, do you have any?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nothing of any meetings or scheduled events, into the future, but I did want to make mention that today is past Commissioner Luis Morales' birthday. And so I just wanted to make mention and put that on the record for tonight that I'm wishing him, and I'm sure the rest of you are wishing him a happy birthday. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. His name should have been Patrick Morales. It would have been.
Right, exactly.
Commissioner Montoya?
Nothing to add. Thank you, Chairman Duarte.
I had a green tie earlier when I was in court, so I like it.
I've got a green lapel pin as well.
Yeah. Good luck. Commissioner Ortiz? Are you there, Commissioner Ortiz?
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Green shirt too. Sharp. I have no announcements. Community Development Director Schindler, can you introduce tonight's presentation?
Yes, thank you, commissioners, and happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Tonight, as we'd mentioned, we wanted to provide a refresher on our mansionization / residential development standards work that we've done to date. As we've mentioned previously, we provided you the agenda packet early. We know it's a lot of information, so we wanted to give you ample time to take a peek at that. And also, we know that it's been some time since we presented the matter and discussed it. And also, in that time, we've got 2 new commissioners with us as well. So we thought it best to present the item tonight more as a refresher, discussion, no action needed, and we'll come back at a future meeting and seek action by the council, which will most likely be in the form of a zoning code amendment. So the last time that we presented this item to the Planning Commission was in November of 2019. And after that, we started to hit our stride, and we had our 3rd and last community meeting on February 10th of 2020. And so as we all remember, a little over a month after that, the world kind of went to pot. And so we had to put the brakes on everything. So we, of course, continue to work, continue to do some work on this project as well. But be it that meetings were at a minimal, we decided also to wait for a better time to resurrect this project for the Planning Commission. So with that, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Crystal, who might say a few words, and then turn it over to our subject matter experts, and that is John Kaliski and his team, who have been doing all of the work. And if you remember, he's the guy that put those little remote control mechanisms in your hands when you guys were looking at different types of housing product, and our community enjoyed that as well. So with that, Crystal, if you'd like to say a few words and then hand it over. If not a big deal. We can send it straight over to John.
No, absolutely. This is definitely a project that has been ongoing in the planning department for a while. We have taken a lot of time to go through it, and John can attest to painstakingly going through and looking at every change that was proposed and comparing it to, is this reflective of what we heard at those community workshops? This is what we heard. How is this being shown up in the proposed changes that we're doing? And so that is something that we took a lot of painstaking effort for, because it was direction that originally came from the city council a couple of years ago, because lots of different issues were boiling up, and this was looked at as a potential resolution to it. And we do believe that we've reached that resolution to address a lot of the concerns that were raised. But John, again, can work us through that entire process, how we got started, the feedback that we did receive, and then how all of that got translated to where we are tonight. So John, if you can.
Thank you, Crystal. I have green hand sanitizer. And today is my 37th anniversary, so I'm sure that we would love this meeting to go well so that I can go home and celebrate. Anyway, St. Patrick's Day, I didn't wear green, but I always have something to celebrate on St. Patrick's Day. Anyway, I'm joined here this evening with my colleagues who have worked on and off on this project, Anshu Dabari and Ariel Brenner, who's really done a tremendous amount of the work on this project over the last year. And it has been quite an adventure. So not only the last year, but the journey that we've taken, as Crystal alluded to, on this project. Do we want to go ahead and share the screen, Ariel? Ariel's controlling the presentation, and I will try to speak to it. So welcome. As Crystal and Aldo pointed out, we were brought on board to assist, and they said we had done all the work. I think the Downey planning staff has been with us every step of the way and has been very active and I think important partners of ours as we've moved forward. But we were originally retained to take a look at R1 development standards and guidelines, and that's what we're going to hopefully present to you tonight and refresh you with for those of you who have already looked at this in terms of what the outcomes have been. Do you want to go to the next one? Okay, so we've done the introductions. What I'm in essence going to do tonight is give you a little bit of the overview of background of this project, describe some of the findings that we made, but also some of the input that we got from previous meetings with the Planning Commission and others, and then walk you through some of the highlights and key points of the draft standards and the draft guidelines. And then, of course, we'll stop and be available for comments and questions, which we would look forward to. Do you want to go to the next one? Go ahead. Okay, so this is a project, our office, we're architects and urban designers. We were retained by the city to look at this project. It's taken a bit longer than we thought it was going to take, and every step of the way we've worked with Crystal and Alfonso. At key points, we've gotten input from Aldo. We did have a series of community meetings and community outreach. They were concentrated at the beginning of the project, but then we came back at the request of one of the Planning Commission or joint study meetings that we had with the Planning Commission and the City Council, and we did another round of community presentation and input. Do you want to go to the next one? Okay, we started this project in July of 2018, so that's 3 years ago. We basically, and for some reason I thought it was July of 2017, but that's okay. Our first effort on this project was to go and look at single family housing in Downey. The issue that we were told in the initial interviews and the response to the request for proposal really boiled down to mansionization. People were really unhappy with how big things were getting. And at the same time, there were some very particular and nuanced issues related to new subdivisions because of the way that Downey's land uses have evolved. There are still opportunities to pick up some of these larger parcels and subdivide them, and there was also a lot of concern about that. So we spent the first couple of months really just looking at what was in the city and trying to understand its history in terms of how it got to where it got, in terms of its single family build form. And we did a site tour where staff basically took us on a drive where they pointed out to us what had been the controversial projects of, say, the previous 2 to 4 years, so that we had a very directed understanding of where there had been discussion, is probably the best way to put it. Sometimes that discussion was with staff, sometimes it went on the way up to the Planning Commission. We then basically engaged in a round of listening, which was what in essence our engagement was. We did design some interactive exercises to make that engagement more friendly and to try to solicit a sort of, not scientific, but rule of thumb sense of what people were talking about. We did 2 initial meetings. They probably were not as well attended as we all had hoped they would be. So we decided to do a 3rd meeting. And so that was basically in the fall of 18. We then did a report to staff of what we learned about. We outlined some what we might call findings and considerations or directions that we might go. And then for various reasons, the project slowed down. I think some of it had to do with there was some staff that left the city and they had to engage new staff, and then they needed to be brought on board. So things just took longer, but we did develop recommendations at a draft level for the zoning code. And we got to the Planning Commission initially in November of 2019 and made a presentation. that was when we basically were encouraged to go back out for one more round of community engagement, which was in addition to what had originally been scoped. It was a good idea because I think all of us felt that it was important to present the work and get some more feedback. We did get some good constructive feedback, though I would say that in reality, at every meeting that we've attended, while they may not have been robustly attended, we consistently heard the same message, that people were concerned that the character of these neighborhoods was being diminished in some way, and that a lot of the new construction made people unhappy, and that some type of reform was needed. We then basically, as Aldo said, right about this time last year, we were all gung-ho to bring it back here in about 2 or 3 months, including some design guidelines, and COVID hit and everything slowed way down, but we continued to work, and now we're finally back here in March of 2021. You want to go to the next one? When we came to the Planning Commission, there were 6 key points which we heard. We heard that you wanted us to understand what the impacts of proposed FAR reductions would be on one-story construction. We've done that testing. You asked us to clarify the proposed FAR relationships, since we are proposing to reduce FAR from its current standard in relationship to ADUs. We've done that, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next few minutes. You asked us to investigate the effects of recommended residential private street and neighborhood compatibility standards. I think what that really is about is you really asked for more energy to be put into the subdivision standards, and more energy was put into that. This is where, in particular, we had some very helpful staff input. You asked us to clarify a modulation standard that we had for setting back second stories. We've shifted that to be more in keeping with the sense of what we heard from the Planning Commission, and we'll discuss that. You asked us to make it much more rigorous, to just say front-facing doors are needed as a design standard. We did that. And you asked us to move forward with the design guidelines, which were not presented at the last Planning Commission meeting, but rather were a recommendation of ours to the city, and you said, yes, we'd like to see design guidelines. So that's what we've produced. That's really new work that's being seen at this meeting for the first time, though of course it's been reviewed by staff, several back and forths. Do you want to go to the next one? Okay, I'll try to go through these quickly, just to remind everyone. Downey is a city of single-family houses. A great percentage of the city is made up of single-family zoning. When we started this project, the issue was mansionization. I think all of us recognize that these issues have evolved over the last 3-4 years, but at the same time, the city really is characterized by this type of architecture, this type of lifestyle, and people that we encountered during this project were pretty committed to it. You want to go to the next one? In your city, you have a variety of different types of lots. One of the things that we try to do in these projects is to understand, well, what's really out there. So we did take a look at your typical lots, your smaller lots. We saw varied lots sometimes. And then there were these lots that were bigger lots that were really remnants of older agricultural holdings, which had never quite been divided down. And sometimes they were developed, most of the time, with larger suburban style homes, but these lots are subdividable, and they've become points of controversy at times within the city, either being subdivided in ways that people found not pleasing, or in a few occasions, some very, very large and impressive homes built on them, which somehow were seen to be, maybe for some of their neighborhoods, as not in keeping with the general scale that's there. You want to go to the next one? We not only looked at the lots, but we tried to understand the distribution of the lots in terms of what are we really designing for. We did not want to design, or we did not want to propose, 4 or 5 different codes that would, for different sized lots. We really wanted to make sure that we were doing something that was hopefully simple, easily understandable. And so we took a look at where is the sweet spot in Downey. And so one of the things that we think is important is about 60% of the lots fall within around 5,000 to 7,000 square feet. So while there are some outliers in terms of these big lots, it's not really the condition that is, it's the exception rather than the rule. So we were constantly trying to understand when we talked to the public, when we worked with staff, are we designing guidelines and standards that are oriented towards what is typical, or are we somehow veering towards trying to address an issue that really only comes up every once in a while? Because we did not want to design the standards for the things either all the way on the right of this bar chart or all the way on the left. You want to go to the next one? Okay, so what's out there? Well, this is basically what you can see under your current zoning in Downey. You have 0.6 FAR, which means you can build 60% of the area of the lot. You've got setback standards, you've got height standards, and you've got the sort of concurrence of those two things coming together. The thing that's interesting about that is that your envelope that your zoning code allows you is always much bigger than the building that would result if you maximize the FAR on 2 stories. And so the point of that, and this is something that we talked about both with the public as well as ourselves, was that you have room within the city of Downey under the 0.6 FAR to in essence, reduce the amount that's allowed and modulate at the same time, because right now you can't fill up your current zoning envelope with the FAR that's allowed. So really all this kind of, when all is said and done, what we were trying to visually demonstrate was that there's room to play. There's room to, like for instance, if you wanted to say, let's have larger rear yards, theoretically you can do larger rear yards. Without any loss of FAR or anything like that. You want to go to the next one. We also took a look at cities in the area. These cities were determined after conversations with staff. These cities were really meant to be bellwethers of cities that people might compare themselves to in Downey, in terms of either maybe they would move to a different community, or maybe they would want to look and feel the same as other communities, or maybe they feel like Downey is the standard and what do other communities do. And what's interesting about the surrounding communities is that in Cerritos and Lakewood, you're able to build more, but in Whittier, La Mirada, Buena Park, Fullerton, Anaheim, you're basically under what Downey allows right now. So yes, it's true. People in Downey have been coming forward to you and to city staff and to us and saying, we think things are too big. And there's no doubt at all that you couldn't build as much in some of these cities. And in a couple of them, you might be able to build a bit more. We've worked on this type of project. This is probably, I think Downey is the 4th city we've done this type of exercise in Southern California. And generally speaking, if we were to expand this range, we'd see that most cities fall somewhere around 0.4 to 0.5, somewhere in there. Cerritos is pretty big. The only other city I know that comes close to that is Beverly Hills. On the other hand, Santa Monica is only at 0.35. And so there are cities that are even less than what we're looking at here. Do you want to go to the next one? Lot coverage is another thing that the Planning Commission asked us specifically about. Right now, there is no lot coverage standard in Downey. What there is a requirement that second stories not exceed 80% of the area of the first story. That's a way of getting some type of second story massing relief. What you do see is that you have lot coverages that are applied in all of these other cities. And most interestingly, if you remember, even though Cerritos is giving you a 0.7 FAR, they're only allowing you 40% lot coverage, which basically means that they want you to build, or they're sending a signal that you should build a 2-story home and keep more of your backyard and side yards and things like that available, then spread the building out over the whole lot. So that's something that we thought was fairly interesting as well. You want to go to the next one? In terms of heights, Downey is on the slightly more restrictive side. Some of these cities are going up to 35 feet. Some of them, you know, if you build a one-story building, you only can do 20 feet. Downey's a little bit different. We have a sort of generalized 28-foot height limit here. So it's kind of sitting in between. Do you want to go to the next one? We not only looked at your zoning, but we also looked at kind of what you might call your character, your built form character, certainly not your personal character. We met nothing but nice people in Downey who, for the most part, were very nice to us. The city was basically, as you all know way better than us, basically an agricultural community up until the 1920s or so when it started to develop slowly. It's got the typical houses that one might see that are characteristic of those eras. There aren't that many examples that are in the city, but the ones that are here, there are some pretty spectacular ones. I really love the Rolling Coat House, the Reeves Mansion. I'm sorry that we still have an image that says private property keep out. Looks kind of foreboding there, but it's a pretty wonderful house. But these are like the very large lots exceptions to the rule. You want to go to the next one? The vast majority of homes in Downey basically are associated with the mid to late 1930s and onwards through the, say, late 70s, early 80s, when the city basically was built out. And it's the type of houses that you see in Downey are very typical of the types of houses that were built throughout Southern California during this time period. The one difference that I would say is that, and I think it's one of the reasons that people have expressed strong opinions, is that the city really hasn't evolved that much in terms of its single family housing. It was amazing to us how much of the original detailing, original windows, how original form with not that many additions, original landscaping we saw. It was pretty powerful. So there's a lot from the 1930s of what in architectural history terms is called minimal traditional housing. It's very characteristic of what was built when you could build housing during the Depression. It's very simple, but it's based on simple, sometimes colonial or ranch type forms, but it's very, very simple. It's also an evolution of the bungalow house from the 20s. You want to go to the next one? As after World War II, starting in the 1930s, but really accelerating after World War II, as people had a bit more money, the houses got a bit bigger and there were more ranch influences that came into play. And you see that in a lot of the tracts that were built at this time. We tried to identify the different characteristics of how these houses work. You want to go to the next one? There are what are called styled ranches. And I think the main thing to say about that is you get a lot of different types of styles applied to what is basically the same ranch, one-story spread out look. So, you know, this one has vaguely Polynesian or South Seas characteristics to it. Sometimes they're colonial, sometimes they're Spanish Revival. There's what's called California or Western, which is based on the specific work of Cliff May, who was really kind of, in some ways, invented the style. He certainly wrote about it and did some of the really great examples of it. You want to go to the next one? More recently, starting after the mid-70s, you got what's called New Traditional. Basically, it plays with all of the different styles, but a lot of the time it's simplified just a little bit. But again, it's revival architecture. You want to go to the next one? And then this is where maybe the rubber hits the road. As people basically were able to, I guess, obtain more money, and as they began to rebuild some of these lots, and they looked at the various rules that exist in the city, they began to what in essence could be called Millennial Mansions. And they're very eclectic as well. You see them in all sorts of different stylings, but there are certain things that not only in Downey, but in a lot of communities, people react to. The reaction to the two-story elements is pretty universal, I'd say, in Southern California. Like there's always an element in most communities that feels uncomfortable with them. The multiple roof lines and size of them is also something that people have a tendency, we hear a lot, to react to. I mean, there are people who will defend this, and we heard some of that as well. Not so much in our meetings here, but in other cities we've heard that. But certainly there is a reaction to this at times. Okay, you want to go to the next one? And then we also have some variants on those, what could be called the Millennial Mansions. It's really the same thing, but it's clothed in kind of some type of modern or contemporary vocabulary. Sometimes these are extremely well done and detailed really well, and people react to them because they see them as being at variance with the traditional styles in the community. And then other times they react to the size and scale of them because they have a tendency to be boxy, built out all the way to the setbacks, built to the maximum height, etc. So in some ways, there's no such thing as there is such thing as great design, but there's probably no way to get everybody to agree to what it is. Do you want to go to the next one? Okay. So we had compiled all this work and we presented it in these meetings, and we did kind of online interactive exercises of the type that we brought to the Planning Commission a year ago, where there was instantaneous voting. We wrote their comments up so that we developed word clusters with them. We listened. We tried to really understand as much as we could what people were concerned about. You want to go to the next one? So to just highlight these key points, we basically said, hey, yeah, residents that we talked to, though there were some outliers, strongly disliked the houses that maximized the existing zoning envelopes. And you can see this was a result from what the 910 and the 1025 meeting. They kind of tracked with each other. We had more people at the 1025 meeting because there was a really strong effort to get people out using social media and other instruments. But you can see that basically the middle clause was overwhelming. And I mean, if you added the neutral and the dislike, there aren't too many people that we at least talked to that like this. Though I do want to concentrate, or I do want to emphasize this is not scientific. Okay, you want to go to the next one. The Planning Commission in its composition last year basically said the same thing. You can see the slide on the left. Only one person was neutral, 4 disliked it. No one really wanted to speak up in favor of it. The one on the right is a little bit more split, and I think it's more split just because it's a one-story building. The people who didn't like it didn't like the 2-story entry. And there are some guidelines that we've introduced or standards that we've introduced to address that. And I think the same person was neutral both times, but that's a philosophical conversation, if not position. You want to go to the next one? Now, we won't go through it exactly the same way, but people didn't like the minimum side yards. They felt that particularly when there were 2 stories, that somehow cramped them in or created privacy issues. You want to go to the next one? People liked houses that were well maintained and consistent with the architectural styles that people saw all the time. The well maintained thing is, of course, beyond the scope of our work. It's something we hear in every community. And I think, again, that becomes sort of a community spirit type of thing, almost more than it is a design thing. I mean, I've been in communities of every stripe and color, and I don't think there's any real relationship between things not being maintained other than, there are community expectations and you see it everywhere and people respond to them. And then when you have a lot of absentee ownership and things like that, people don't respond to it. You want to go to the next one? People were concerned about the subdivisions. The thing that we heard about the subdivisions, not only with regard to the architecture, but also that somehow the streets in the subdivisions didn't feel right. They didn't feel like a continuation of the community. The housing didn't seem like the same housing that was in the community. You know, what could you do about that? Like, this is a really interesting photograph because, you know, if it's a typical single family house, there are only going to be 2 garbage cans or 3 garbage cans in front of each house. On a subdivision, in this case, they're hauling all their garbage cans out because it's a private street where they can get the sanitation service. People don't like that. You want to go to the next one? Okay, so when we looked at all the different issues, these were the themes that we heard about. We did private streets, subdivisions, privacy, second stories, development in general, the size of buildings and the character of buildings. There were what I would call outlier comments about traffic, street parking, and safety. I think a lot of those comments are a little bit beyond the scope of what we were doing. I would say at most, you know, we could look at some parking issues, and for the most part, we haven't really changed parking requirements at all. But the issue of people complaining about too much traffic in the neighborhood, or they don't feel the neighborhood is safe, really does go beyond the scope of what we're capable of dealing with in zoning. You want to go to the next one? Okay, so having done all that background work, what are the highlights of what we are bringing forward for potential adoption as amendments to your existing drafting code, zoning code? You want to go to the next one? Thank you. Basically, we are proposing to reduce the FAR from 0.6 to 0.45. I think when all is said and done, this is probably the most effective, simple, straightforward thing that you can possibly do. As long as you basically allow the 0.6, people are going, it doesn't really matter how much you modulate these buildings. I don't think it, in all honesty, matters what the architectural style is. They're just going to appear to be substantially larger than what the existing prevailing one-story environment looks like and feels like and how it's experienced. So I think this is always a debatable issue. I think that every community does it a little bit differently, but if the goal is to respond to the voices that we consistently heard and that were even very strong before we got involved in this discussion, it seems like it's a reasonable thing to do, and it would still allow you on a typical lot to build a substantial home has more square footage in it than is right at the mean of what the typical new house in the United States of America is. So, and at the same time, what these diagrams demonstrate, and these diagrams basically, they're not really single family houses, but what they are is they're illustrations of the nexus of all of the design standards that we're proposing at once. What they demonstrate is that you can place garages behind a maxed out house. Those garages can potentially they can accommodate ADUs if people want to build ADUs. So we're in compliance. We're not trying to keep people from doing anything. And in general, the guidelines will modulate the buildings a bit more. It will shrink their overall gross size, but people will still be able to take advantage of all the opportunities that this type of zoning provides for. Do you want to go to the next one? We want to slightly modify the definition of floor area in order to address some of the more egregious issues that have come up over the years in terms of people slipping stealth floors in, double height areas, etc. So we do want to include accessory structures, not ADUs, but accessory structures, foyers that are double height, mezzanines and lofts in the definition of floor area and make that more explicit. We do want to count any floor or portion of a floor with a ceiling height greater than 12 feet twice towards the floor area. We're not telling people they can't do double height spaces. We're just saying, listen, if you want to do a double height space, you have to think about it. It's not you have to decide how to do it judiciously. because at a certain point, you're just penalizing yourself. As of right now, the definition of floor area excludes garages, carports, open patios, and open porches from the FAR calculation. So again, we're not trying to penalize people here under this definition for owning a car or wanting to have it in a garage. You want to go to the next one? We are suggesting that a lot coverage of 45% be introduced. We think this is important because it does ensure that there's a modicum of open space around the building where landscaping, trees, et cetera, can go. At the same time, we feel, particularly if people go up to 2 stories, that allows you to maximize the square footage without any difficulty at all. And we think that by combining the floor lot coverage requirement with the floor area as reduced, that it begins to sort of push the new construction closer to the ratio of built form and open space at the neighborhood scale. Because the older houses, and in this illustration, we have an older house shown as well, they didn't cover a lot. They have really big backyards. And so we think it's important that that lot coverage not be totally just building. You want to go to the next one? We are suggesting that the first story side yard setbacks be modified so that there's a minimum of 10% of the lot width, but not less than 5 feet. So if you owned a 50-foot lot, you would basically have 2 5-foot side yards. If you owned a lot that was wider than 50 feet, you would have a little bit of flexibility about where you put the additional, you have to figure out where to put, instead of 10% of the lot width for your side yard, it would be 6 feet, but you could put 5 feet on one side if you wanted to, and have a larger setback on one side. So what we're trying to do is make it so that by putting this 10% lot width in, that as houses are added onto, that they don't end up just having 2 minimal side yards. There's some opportunity to create a little bit more landscape buffers in the side yards. We are saying that it doesn't need to exceed 14 feet. So once your lot became greater than 140 feet, you wouldn't have to have, like in this example, 180 feet. You'd still only be at 14 feet. You wouldn't have to go to 18 feet. You want to go to the next one? This was one of the issues that was brought up at the last Planning Commission meeting. We had originally shown a 10-foot setback from the front facade for anything more than a certain percentage of front facade. I think we listened to what folks said and have moved it forward to 5 feet. And we're also saying that there's a maximum percentage of facade at the second story that can be at the exact same plane as the first story, as a way of beginning to encourage people to design buildings that, again, acknowledge the predominant and prevailing 1-story scale that we still see in most of these neighborhoods. You want to go to the next one? We're suggesting the same type of modulation occur at side yards. So if you think about it, we're not only saying that there's a slight tweaking of the way your side yards work to get probably one side having a little bit more than the other side as your lots get above, say, 50 feet. But at the same time, we're saying that you have to break down those side facades so that that sense of looming over the other house doesn't appear, that you don't end up with just a completely straight wall on a side yard or next to a driveway. Okay, you want to go to the next one? The 2-story porch issue, this is always interesting. There are lots of ways to do this, but generally we're basically making it so that you can build a 1-story entry and that you got to make it a minor massing in comparison to the major massing of the roof. And if you do a pitched roof there, it has to match that of the main structure so that there's some type of harmony. You want to go to the next one? Street-facing garage doors. They're always, when you're dealing with much bigger lots, there's the issue of how much do you allow the garage to predominate. You know, traditionally, a lot of the houses up until, say, 1965 or so, maybe 1960, the garage was in the back. At this point in time, most people will choose not to put a garage in the back of the building. But if people start building 3, 4 car garages on narrow lots, the garage ends up becoming the expression of the house rather than the front door and the neighborliness of the more sort of pedestrian approach that was traditional. So we are putting some constraints on how big a garage door can be, where it sits in relationship to the front facade, and what happens if you start to introduce a third garage to the garage suite, if you will. 2 basically can sit just, I think, 5 feet behind, and the next third one has to go another 5 feet back, if my memory serves me right. You want to go to the next one? Okay, subdivisions. The main thing that we tried to do with the subdivisions is design standards that would basically get the public face of the subdivision to be as compatible, and that's not a good word, to follow the pattern as closely as possible as the pattern of what we typically see in the prevailing condition. So we're basically saying you have to orient some front doors towards the typical public street, that you have to try to maximize the number of units that face the public street, and that when you do have a private street or driveway going back to units behind, that there needs to be some basic landscaping and consideration for how that street is designed so it begins to mimic a little more closely the sort of standard form of what a public street looks like. You want to go to the next one? So for instance, we have now private road standards that try to both accommodate some guest parking, which we always hear a lot about in these situations, minimum fire width, but also a landscape strip on at least one side with a set of what in essence are street trees, but in this case, they would be private street tree or driveline street trees. So those have been introduced. They recognize different sizes of sites. Do you want to go to the next one? So like if your private road is less than 36 feet, you can do it such that the, in essence, street expression is basically contained within the private property. If your street gets a little bit wider than 36 feet, you have to dedicate 4 feet of the common area to that landscape strip and sidewalk. You want to go to the next one? In terms of off-street parking, this is really more of a technical fix. Right now, your off-street parking is based upon the 0.6 FAR numbers, 5,000 square feet, 7,500, et cetera. So all this is to try to tweak the numbers so that the 2 cars versus 3 cars versus 4 cars stay aligned with the reduction in FAR, that where you don't end up inadvertently forcing more cars than you need to, given what the changes in FAR are going to be. Do you want to go to the next one? We've suggested some additional landscape standards, mainly that there be at least 1 tree planted in a front yard and 1 in a rear yard. I would plant even more trees because this is in an era of climate change. Well-maintained trees are going to make the city cooler and keep it from having more hotspots. So we think this is a good idea, not only from a neighborhood design standpoint, but also from a climate-friendly approach to mitigate some of the heat that we are increasingly experiencing. You want to go to the next one? It's hard to dictate style, and at the same time, a lot of the time what happens is people only put it on the front facade. So this is a very straightforward recommendation that you have to have 360-degree architecture. So whatever you choose to build, you got to extend it to the side yard, the rear yard, and particularly when you have 2-story buildings and people are looking at it, it means that you would see architecture instead of somebody choosing not to spend any money back there. And there are some, like the example on the right is a great example of someone just building a new garage next to a gabled house, but deciding to just do it in a way that's completely not in keeping with the house. So you basically would need to maintain the existing consistency of the architecture throughout. You want to go to the next one. Okay, so those are standards. Those you might describe as shalls, but there was a desire to sort of try to address in a clear and consistent way the shoulds as well, which really have to do with the character of the neighborhoods. And this is a more nuanced activity because I always like to respect people's rights to have an opinion about what their own house looks like. At the same time, I think a community has a right to basically say, we think this is what we're interested in. And so we tried to devise design guidelines that would allow those two interests to hopefully align with each other. On one level, these guidelines are an educational and design tool for the applicants. They will be, assuming that they were adopted, available so that when somebody comes in to planning staff and says, we're thinking of building a new house or we're thinking of doing an addition, that staff has a consistent message for how the city thinks you might do that in a way that creates the least friction possible, and also in a way that upfront describes what the aspirations and expectations of the community are, but in a way that is done fairly and judiciously. And it also does something else, which it means that staff gets to stay on message because, you know, staff are coming from different backgrounds, different ideas. And I think that one of the struggles that always happens in every city is that an applicant comes in, talks to staff person A, then 2 weeks later they come in, staff person B tells them something, and they say, well, staff person A said I could do it differently. So this is, again, a way of trying to make that conversation better for the applicants so that there's a more consistent conversation. Okay, so that's what we tried to do. Those were our objectives. You want to go to the next one? So what do we have here? We have a process first and foremost. We'll talk about the guidelines, but what is the process? The process is we've written out a bunch of guidelines. And then what we've done is we've gone back and we've created a checklist. And sometimes you have to meet the checklist. So for instance, it says character and style, use Downey characteristic residential architectural styles. We've listed 5 styles. We're basically saying, after discussion with staff and hearing input, yeah, choose one of those 5 styles. You choose any one you want. But some of them are different. Like, for instance, the next one, mass, bulk, and height, we didn't say that you needed to meet every one. So we've tried to build in some flexibility to allow people to basically play with these guidelines. And so basically for staff and the applicant, you go through, you check all this, you meet all of this, you're done. It's ministerial, you move on. If somebody comes in and they say they want to do something that's at variance with what the guidelines say, we've got these principles right here, 1 through 7. And basically we have a directive that the city planner can listen to, can look at the design. If they can make all, in essence, of these findings, 1 through 7, the project can be approved. If either they can't make these findings, they can work with the applicant to meet the findings. If the applicant decides they're not interested in meeting the findings, that's the point at which it becomes an appeal to the Planning Commission. My own feeling is that these overarching objectives 1 through 7 are broad enough and fair enough that I think it would be difficult for somebody not to meet these unless they really did not want to build something that in some way was fair. And I think that just boils down to the same process that you have right now. If you're an outlier, you're an outlier. If you insist on being an outlier, then it's a public discussion. And that's a choice that folks make. We cannot write a set of design guidelines that is going to cover every single circumstance. So what we've done is we've tried to create a fair process that gives people a clear path. If they can't meet the clear path, gives people a way of meeting overarching objectives, which the city planner can sign off on. And if they won't meet the objectives and they won't meet the clear path, then it seems like that's your job to say this is something that's good or something that doesn't fit the overall zoning and general plan objectives of the city. Do you want to go to the next one? So what's in the guidelines? Well, these are just the 7 points, which I think are very straightforward. Follow the prevailing mass, bulk, and height and modulation patterns that you see in your neighborhood and on your same block. Utilize single-story characteristics, dormers, wings, second-story additions set behind ridge lines or that meet the standards with the 5-foot setback. Maintain street wall continuity, meaning line it all up the way things are going right now. Retain prevailing setbacks and open space at side and rear yards. The standards that we're proposing are already helping you do that, even more so than the standards you have right now. So I don't feel like any of these should be that hard to meet. You want to go to the next 3? Oh, there are actually 8, but use multi-tiered and region-appropriate landscape. You already have landscape standards and guidelines in your code that encourage people and require people to do that. Minimize visual impacts of automobiles seems pretty straightforward. Again, we've given people new standards that already are leading them there. Maintain street wall continuity, entry orientation. The last one is observe and encourage the use of Downey's characteristic architectural styles and design principles. We've outlined what those are in the rest of the guidelines. Do you want to go to the next one? So what we've done is we have identified the prevailing styles that one sees in the city. We've tried to identify the characteristics of those styles in terms of typical roof pitch, typical window type, typical entry, and we have, as to the maximum extent feasible, tried to make those points that we've identified quantitative. It's like you either meet that roof pitch or you don't meet that roof pitch. You either basically, have a certain percentage of opening or you don't. So even though these things are guidelines, we've tried to structure them so that they are easy, hopefully for the applicants, but certainly for staff to know how to use and to basically clearly explain to applicants. You want to go to the next one? We have some more styles. I'm sorry. I think we skipped one there, Ariel.
Sorry, these are 5 styles listed, ranch and styled ranch combined.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, you want to go to the next one? Okay, we've also, this is a listing. I don't think that we have the time. We can always come back and go through these more carefully if you'd like us to, but these in essence are the design guidelines. We've listed them here. Some of them overlap with those big objectives that we were just talking about a few moments ago. Do you want to go to the next one? So where we're at right now is we've been through a process. We've been on a journey. It started 3 years ago. We've tried to listen to what people have talked about. We've had a lot of great conversations with staff, batting these ideas back and forth. Sometimes we've gone further. Sometimes we've retreated. We've gotten input from a joint study session with the Planning Commission and Council. We've gotten input from the Planning Commission on a couple of occasions. We've written design guidelines. We've tried to design a process that hopefully is fair, clear, allows staff to, as much as possible, be consistent in their dealings with the public and by being consistent, fair. And we're looking forward to the next Planning Commission meeting, which will be in a month or so. We're looking forward to your questions tonight. And if all goes as planned, my understanding is this would end up in front of the City Council in about a couple of months, 7 weeks or so. And if that happened, then there would be some type of adoption of some tweaks to your zoning code and the addition of a design guidelines document that would allow staff to be working with applicants on a day-to-day basis to make improvements to their homes or build new homes. So thank you very much. You want to go to the next one? And I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much. Prior to asking the commissioners if they have any questions, we're going to open this presentation up for public comment. So I'd like to remind members of the public participating telephonically that the city's meeting rules contained in the Downey Municipal Code prohibit any conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting, even if you're participating telephonically. Each speaker shall have 3 minutes to address the commission on issues addressed during the presentation only. Members of the public wishing to address the planning commission may now call our teleconference line at 562-299-6622. For those who submitted comments via email, those comments will be read into the record, and no further public comment via teleconference will be permitted. Secretary Cabo, may I have the first speaker on the phone?
Chair Duarte, there are no calls for public comment.
Okay. Secretary Kavanaugh, do we have any written public comment on the presentation to be read into the record?
There are no written public comments.
Okay, we will now close the public comments. Commissioner Ortiz, do you have any questions or comments?
No comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Commissioner Montoya?
Yeah, I have one question. I don't know if this may be addressed to staff, but if I understand, the side setback minimum is 5 feet recommended, correct, on each side?
The new standard will be 10% of the lot width with a minimum of 5 feet. So, and that again is just to accommodate the different width sizes that we have in the city.
Okay. So I guess the ultimate question I have is if any neighbors have any issues of privacy of a home being too close, would they have the ability to maybe build up their wall to solve that issue? Would that be an option for them?
Mm-hmm. They're separating yard wall. There's a maximum height that we have for that, which is about 7 feet in our residential areas. And that would be the maximum height that they can do. Okay. But we did try again that 10% so that a larger lot would have a deeper side setback to accommodate that. And also there's additional modulation required in the side to also break up that tall wall coming in from the side yard.
I see. Okay.
Sure. And Commissioner, if I can add, there's a lot of other strategies that homeowners can use. One is landscaping. The other is the positioning of windows, how opaque a window is or not. And those are things that staff look at as well.
Okay, perfect. And that concludes all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Montoya. Vice Chair Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to thank Mr. Kaliski and staff for a very detailed presentation. I remember the original time spent on it. So by having it redone certainly allowed recall from the first presentation and gave the new commissioners a chance to hear about all of this. So other than that, I don't have any concerns or comments right now. I'm going to dive into the information a little deeper. I understand, the presentation. And so again, no comments at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just have 2 questions. We talked about the guidelines with the characteristics, the height, the bulk, the landscape. How about in terms of colors of homes? Because that's something that I see that sometimes, can present a problem in terms of ISO or not. How is that considered?
Chairman Duarte, you're not alone in that opinion, and that runs from city to city. In every city, at least one pink house will go up, and when that pink house goes up, that topic flares up and is discussed. We don't know a lot of cities that manage paint color. The closest one is Cerritos, and their motto is, if it isn't brown, tear it down. So that is something, if the commission wants to suggest, could include in that. And council can consider that as well, because you're right. You drive by that pink house and you do a double take and go, how in the heck was that ever allowed? So yeah, it could be an element that you might want to include.
I'll also add in our guidelines, though they're voluntary, in the description of each style, we do address color and kind of on a broad level, suggest how people should be utilizing color in the context of each style. But yeah, it currently isn't presented as a requirement.
The pink house, Mr. Schindler, you read my mind. It's actually always different variations of pink.
We've also, in City of Burbank, we did residential design guidelines for R1 neighborhoods. And in that city, the color issue was very, very upfront. And so at the same time, I think there was a reluctance to dictate color, like the brown or go down or whatever it was that Aldo mentioned. But what we did do in that one is we went one step further than what we've put in this one, which is that we actually had color palettes in there in the design guidelines. And so, you know, one option, if the Planning Commission wanted to, would be to simply put in more explicit color palettes and basically say, if you stay within this, you know, you're done. If you deviate from this, it becomes up to the city planner. If the city planner can't feel comfortable with it, it becomes a Planning Commission issue. But I have to say, color is probably one of the most difficult things to have to talk about in public in particular. And I in my early days as a city planner, I once had to reject a project that was purple. And I was forever known in the city of Los Angeles as the person who rejected the purple house. And some people still know that about me. And you know, it was like, well, I had to do it for various reasons. I was instructed to do it, but I became a marked person for the rest of my career as a city planner. Mm-hmm. So, but we can take your direction on that. And if it's something you wanted to explore a little more deeply, there are ways of doing it.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be worthwhile. Maybe we could explore that, maybe with the palettes. And then just, you know, my other question was in terms of the talking about the variants in the neighborhoods, and I saw the modern house, and I've seen a couple of those. Do you see that tends to motivate other neighbors to maybe modernize their homes, or do they just have disdain for these homes that are kind of stick out in the neighborhood?
Well, I think this is a very complicated issue because I think that the first generation of contemporary houses in Downey basically were reacted negatively. The people that did react to them negatively tended to be older. I think that if you were to talk to people who are, say, 30 to 40 years old, who are purchasing, say, a first house or something like that, or a house for their family, in general, that generation is much more sympathetic to contemporary architecture than people maybe of my generation were, though I've always been a great admirer of modern architecture, so I personally don't have a problem. So what I would tell you is that as time goes on, I think that you're going to find more and more people who want to build contemporary additions and contemporary houses. At the same time, we're not precluding that at all because it is one of the characteristic styles that we've identified. So we then get back to what I think is the core issue here is not in the end style so much as it is size, bulk, mass, lack of side yards, which one of the commissioners brought up a moment ago, and not being able to plant a tree there or something like that. And so my own feeling as a person who does this is I would much rather see a city concentrate on the things they can easily control and let people, you know, in some ways, don't tell people what clothes they can wear, right? But on the same time, you've got something that's pretty special in your city. And so fine, if you want to go down that route, go for it. So I think it should, you know, right now, the way everything is written, you're allowed to do it, but we're still pointing people in a certain direction.
Chairman, so we all know that Downey is an extremely desirable move-up community for the entire area.
Yep.
I grew up in the city of La Mirada, and when I was little, we'd go to Downey to look at the Christmas lights. You know, they just had an abundance of Christmas lights draped over a lot of big houses. You know, that was one of my childhood memories. Our experience at our counter is that we get a lot of folks that are moving in from the surrounding cities, and they like the certain types of houses in Downey. And when they see something they like, they want to build it just like that. Good, bad, or indifferent in terms of design. So we do get a lot of folks that are inspired by Downey architecture that are moving from the surrounding cities and want to emulate it. So we do get that.
Okay. You come trick-or-treating over here too, right? Okay, that concludes my questions. If any commissioners have any follow-up? No, okay. Well, I'd like to thank the staff for the presentation. It was a great presentation. And just thanks again for getting this to us early. As there is no action to take for this item, we'll continue with tonight's agenda. Okay, Community Development Director Schindler, are there any city council actions to report?
Thank you, Chair Duarte. Yes, the council received a presentation via public hearing, similar to what the Planning Commission received at their last meeting in regards to the industrial development on Woodruff, and that's the old Kirk Hills site. And the council took the same action as the commission and approved that mitigated neg deck in terms of the CEQA action and the subtle zoning change from the parking buffer. And that concludes my update.
Okay. There's no public hearings today, so we'll go on to non-agenda public comments. This portion of the agenda provides an opportunity for the public to address the Planning Commission on items within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission and not listed on the agenda. It is requested but not required that you state your name, address, and subject matter upon which you wish to speak. Please limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. Pursuant to the Brown Act, no discussion or action other than a brief response, referral to the city planning staff, or schedule for a subsequent agenda shall be taken by the Planning Commission on any issue brought forth under this section. Before we begin the non-agenda public comment period, I'd like to remind members of the public participating telephonically that the city's meeting rules contained in the Downey Municipal Code prohibit any conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting, even if you're participating telephonically. Each speaker should have 3 minutes to address the commission on issues that are within the commission's jurisdiction. Members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding non-agenda public comments only may now call our teleconference line at 562-299-6622. For those who submitted comments via email, your comments will be read into the record and no further public comment via teleconference will be permitted. Secretary Cavanaugh, may I have the first speaker on the phone?
There are no calls or emails for public comments.
Okay, no emails? Okay, great. We'll now close the non-agenda public comments. Going on to the consent calendar, items in this section will be voted in one motion unless a commissioner or citizen requests separate actions. Anyone wishing to discuss a consent calendar item shall be recognized by the chairman, state name, address, and agenda item number. Further, any consent calendar items removed from the agenda will be considered by the commission following the public hearing items. Before we begin the consent calendar comment period, I'd like to remind members of the public participating telephonically that the city's meetings rules contained in the Downey Municipal Code prohibit any conduct that disrupts, disturbs, or interferes with the orderly conduct of the meeting, even if you're participating telephonically. Each speaker should have 3 minutes to address the commission on consent calendar items. Members of the public wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding the consent calendar items only may now call our teleconference line at 562-299-6622. For those who submitted comments via email, your comments will be read into record and no further public comment via teleconference will be permitted. Secretary Cavanaugh, may I have the first speaker on the phone?
Chair Duarte, there are no calls for public comment or written comments for the consent calendar.
Okay, we will now close the consent calendar public comments. We have one item. The one item in the consent calendar. Does any commissioner have any questions on the item or has a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion to approve the consent calendar item.
I second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. Secretary Cavanaugh, would you please take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Ortiz?
Aye.
Commissioner Montoya?
Aye.
Vice Chair Owens,
Aye.
and Chair Duarte.
Aye.
The motion passes with all 4 in favor to adopt the consent calendar.
Okay, moving on, other business. Is there, the commissioner have any other business to discuss? Vice Chair Owens?
None tonight. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Montoya?
Nothing to report. Thank you, Chairman.
Commissioner Ortiz?
Nothing to report. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody.
Yeah, happy St. Patrick's Day. Now moving on to staff member comments. Mr. Schindler?
Thank you, Chair Duarte. Last Saturday, we held a very muted and COVID-friendly groundbreaking of the Rancho South Campus Sports Complex. It's going to be built next to St. Pius Matthias off of Gardendale. Another great milestone in terms of progress with the construction. The estimated completion date of that project is December of this year. So 2022 will bring a lot of great things and more soccer fields and football fields and lacrosse fields to the city of Downey. And also in regards to the COVID relief rental assistance program that we provide to residents, we increased the amount of rent subsidy from 1 month to 3 months. So if you know anybody that's applied and already received money for 1 month, they can get 2 more months. If you know anybody in need, please have them contact us and we can pay for 3 months worth of rent. And that concludes my updates.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask Mr. Schindler just a comment, a couple questions. So on the Rancho South Campus site, I know it's a county project. Do you know, is there any historian assigned, or hired? That hospital site's set there a long time. That property is very old. Who knows what was there in the past? Is there anything like that that's been assigned that you know of?
Yes, the LA Conservancy, which is the behemoth historic preservation group in the county, has worked closely with the County of LA in their CEQA environmental impact report on their historic assessment. So they've looked at all the buildings and they've gone into detail as to which ones have historic relevance and which ones may not. That process has been going on for the last 3 years between the Conservancy and the county. So they're doing inventories and they're also going to archive any other information that they have there. But the county hasn't been able to move until it's gotten an approval or reached some sort of agreement with the LA Conservancy as to what's going to stay and what's not.
Okay, thank you. So in addition to that, I drove by the site today just because I was curious. I'm a graduate of Pius X, go Warriors. Is that a parking structure going in first, or is that the actual footprint of the multi-sport complex? Doesn't seem very large.
Yeah, you know what? It's only 5 acres, and 5 acres seems big when you just kind of banter around acres. We're only getting 3 soccer fields on that. So yeah, that whole area is 5 acres. It's going to include a parking field for approximately 74 spaces and those 3 fields. We started out with 20 acres that we were negotiating with the county. We thought we hit a sweet spot at 10, and then unfortunately it slipped to 5. Now I can't bitch too much because they gave us $10 million to build that. Yeah. So, it's a good project, but you're right. You look at it, you're thinking, wow, 5 acres, goes pretty quick.
Yeah. But my thoughts, not too large of a spot. Thank you.
Okay. No truth to the rumor that's the Mateus Flores project?
Well, by saying that, you're slighting his little brother Val, so I can't say there's any truth to that.
Okay. All right. Well, this meeting is adjourned at 7:45. Happy St. Patrick's.